Namaste. Welcome to Wise Out Career Guide. Today we have somebody who's been working in the international market with some of the big brands in the field of marketing, especially in brand and communication. We have Miss Edna Yahil with us. Welcome, Edna.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today.
So, Edna, I have seen your profile and, seen your educational background, which I must say is a bit intimidating. But for our viewers, could you please share what was the initial, educational background that got you into your first role, your
Okay, so
starting journey?
let's begin by just explaining that I am American by birth, and
Okay.
I have lived for the past 22 years in Europe. So just to sort of clarify that, so I did my schooling in the United States, okay, my
Okay.
high school, with the exception of 1 year that I actually spent in Thane, in Maharashtra when I was 16 years old. So I already was
Oh,
in India
wow.
when I was, for the first time I came, I was actually 15. But most of my education was in the US. I went to Stanford University for my bachelor's. And then I did two masters, one at UCLA, which is the University of California, Los Angeles, and one at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. And then I did
Okay.
a PhD at UCLA as well. Now, in the US, it's a bit different than India in that I think we're a bit more flexible in terms of the major, okay? So
Okay.
I know most of the people I know in India, they do IIT and then they do an IIM, or they try to do, an MBA afterwards. And in America, it's a bit more flexible. So my studies were primarily in history, but I did a lot of
Okay.
writing. And my first internship or job professionally was in 2003 for the UN, where I worked for UNESCO, which is the United
Okay.
Nations Education, Science, and Culture Organization, which is based in Paris.
Mhm.
And that's so I sort of entered the field through the social sciences, which is sort of rare, and then continued my journey because basically I wrote well. I mean, let's be honest, that's how I, I fell into it. Oh, and I
So
should add,
when
I
and
apologize. One more thing. And then I've gone back to school last year.
okay,
And so in 2021 and 2022, I did a postgraduate certificate at Cambridge University in sustainable business. So, and this is something we can
okay,
talk about later, but it's a really great course and I highly recommend it.
all right. So, from writing and working with UNESCO as your first job, how did brand communication come into play?
So I spent a total of about 4 years with a bit of a break from maternity leave at UNESCO. And I worked first in the social science sector, then in the education sector. And then my last role was in the Bureau of Public Information, which is like a corporate comms role, if you will, in a regular company. And I worked, again, this was between 2003 and 2007. And so I was doing a lot of digital, publications, but also print publications. And what was amazing about UNESCO was that it was a wonderful brand, right? And then they had a
Right.
wonderful, if you will, product. You have the World Heritage, you have education for all, So, but there were some things missing for me professionally. And I had a very tough conversation with my supervisor, where she said, look, you're really good at your job, but will you be happy to be sitting here in Paris doing the same thing in 10 or 15 years? Okay. Because you won't have the same opportunities within the UN to try different things, to manage teams, and also, some of the career progression is more political, based on nationality or something like that, right? So I
Right.
sort of thought a lot about it, and then I decided to go in a completely different direction, and I went into tobacco. So I went from a wonderful brand to Philip Morris, which makes Marlboro, which I think everyone knows, which is sort
Yes.
of at the time was coming off of many years of being sort of, the big bad tobacco, but it was
Mm-hmm.
a period of change, right? And it was a period
Right.
where the tobacco industry, and Philip Morris was really leading the way then, we're starting to say, yes, we make a product that is dangerous for your health. But if you were an adult smoker, we would like you to choose this product. Okay. Since then, the
Okay.
company has gone even further. It is now doing, heat not burn cigarettes, and the brand is moving in a different direction. But at the time, what was so interesting about moving from a positively viewed brand to a really negatively viewed one was that I learned a very different skill set. So I did a lot
Right.
of reactive PR, if you will, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
messaging. It was extremely technical. There were really serious legal repercussions because we were not allowed to advertise, and some of the things that we might say or do could be considered advertising if we weren't extremely cautious. So I kind of went from marketing, communicating around a popular brand like the UN to something that is a popular product but has a lot of side issues.
Restrictions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I
So,
spent 8 years at Philip Morris, so it was a learning, to put it.
wow.
And I think
So,
the other,
from,
yeah, so go
yeah,
on.
you were saying something. Please
So
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I was just going to, the one other thing I think is really important to know, and something, a lesson a lot of the people who are, younger in India now can think about, is when you go to these big multinational companies, they're pros and their cons. Okay, so you have the best tech, you have really robust processes, you learn project management, you really have huge budgets. But you may progress more slowly than if you are at a startup or in a smaller company. I think there's always a trade-off, and the reason I left Philip Morris after 8 years is that I got to a certain level. I was very well paid. I was very happy. I could have stayed there a lot longer, but I wanted again to do something different. I think there are parallels with what I see today when I see these freshers running off of their MBA courses straight into a startup in India. So yeah,
Yeah, so the processes will have their pros and cons,
yeah,
The processes are set so your ability to innovate goes down,
yes,
which you obviously get from a startup. So, in terms of the European job markets,
yes.
what is the opportunities for freshers who are coming from India?
Okay, so before I say this, I just want to say that I am not a legal or immigration expert. So I'm going to just,
Absolutely.
but I
No,
had some convers I
I
had
am
some
asking you
conversation.
this from the perspective that you've worked in the corporates there,
Yeah,
and the markets are opening up. So the
yes.
big multinationals present in the European market, how open are they to outside Europe resources?
So this is a very good question. So I have a lot of Indian friends and colleagues, and I actually spoke to a few over the weekend just to test everything out before I speak with you.
Okay.
But let me just
Sure.
clarify some terminology, because when we talk about Europe, there are two things. There's the European continent, which has about 750 million people and includes Russia, parts of Turkey, etc. And then there's the
Right.
European Union, which is 27 countries now that Britain left.
Absolutely.
Then you have the EEA, which has Liechtenstein and Norway and Iceland. So, and it's different in different markets. Okay. And even in the
Okay.
EU, okay,
Hmm.
you have differences because what you have is more flexibility. And I'll talk about this in a minute, in certain markets than in others. So let's just talk about the job market as a whole. The job market as a whole is difficult for young people in Europe because there
Hmm.
tends to be higher unemployment than, say, in the US. I'm currently teaching at a master's course in communications in Paris, and so a lot of my students are now getting jobs and doing internships and whatnot. So it is possible, but it's really, you know, it's tough. However, there are certain ways that I've seen Indian colleagues come to Europe, and I'll list them very simply. One, you work for a company that sends you to Europe. Okay, I have a very good friend, Rohit from TCS, and he's been in Basel for many years. He's very happy. I actually have quite a few friends from TCS floating around Europe, so that's a good company if you want to come. So one way to do it is through an Indian company. Now, there is a risk, and I'm going to say this sort of anonymously by not saying the name of the company, but I do have a friend of mine who was sent to Poland last year and has now lost his job. And it becomes more complicated because of the nationality issue. So one is to be sent by your company. The second is there are many master's programs taught in English and in countries you wouldn't think of, including France, Sweden, Finland, etc. And many of them have opportunity to work after you do the course. So that's something you need to research. But again, country by country, the cost is much lower than in the US, but there's still a cost often. Sometimes there's scholarships. A third way is there are what's called nomad visas in certain markets where you can work remotely, okay? And again, this changes from time to time. Estonia has a very big startup culture. Portugal does. And again, that's one way. And then the last way, which is by far the easiest, is if you find yourself a spouse with a European nationality, because then automatically you can come and work. So that's from the, you know, the real practical aspect. But there's definitely possibilities. I have in all the jobs I've been working with Indian colleagues at all different levels in various countries, in Switzerland, in France, in the UK. Yeah. So there you go. So I hope that sort of answers it. And in terms of what people are looking for, in the marketing side, it really depends. Okay. So there is a lot of startups now that are looking for people to do growth marketing, you know, SAS, growth marketing, sort of similar things that you'll see in India. I think that people who have done that in India are at an advantage almost, because by definition, they've had a bigger market than the people who are working in Europe, right? Because the market size you have. The disadvantage could be the language issue, because you may not speak all of the European languages, although that's not always possible. On the agency side, you know, I have some students who are working in PR or advertising agencies, etc. In France, at least, which is where I live, the pay tends to be significantly lower. So what people will often do is do it for 2-3 years to really boost their credibility and then go into a multinational. And then in the multinationals, usually you have to have a certain level before you can enter a role. You know, either they take people out of school or they take you sort of at a certain level. So it really depends again on the country and the multinational and whatnot. But so, I know people who are 20 who are Indian who have jobs in Paris, and I know people who are 50. So it's really, the whole gamut is possible.
So Edna, you know, through your experience, what are the changes in terms of roles that you've seen in marketing, especially brand communication? What are the kind
That's
of,
a
you know,
really...
because earlier there was, you know, marketing was one single department and it handled, you know, one person would do the research and the communication bit as well. Now everything is becoming more specialized and more focused. So how has that changed in the European market?
I think it depends again on the country and the size of the company and everything. Okay, there's a lot of dependency with. I'll speak again on France and Switzerland, which are the countries I'm most comfortable with, on agencies, especially for some of the technical work. Okay. So often, when I was at Nissan, for example, we were working primarily with agencies for everything having to do with brand, marketing, et cetera. And we had huge teams in-house, but we really depended on that. There's a lot of very good design agencies. There are a lot of agencies now. I'm starting to work with agencies in Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, countries on the east where in the past it was traditionally you always went to London, right? And now what you
Yeah.
see is much more collaboration that's really pan-European, and you see a lot more people who are working in networks, if you will. Okay, so even individual freelancers or something will have or smaller agencies will have a partner in another European country, and so that way you're able to have the flexibility of working with a network without having to pay an Ogilvy or Weber Shandwick type fees, right? So I think that's
Right.
different in terms of the job descriptions. And again, I teach people who are doing their fifth year of studies and ready to go on the market. The problem is, and I've seen this in India as well, because I have spent a lot of time in your country.
Right.
Now people want someone who is a graphic designer, can write, and can do all of the technical work, and pay them, whatever,
Okay.
half a lakh a month equivalent, right? And I think that's really a bit of a shame, because it does dilute the real importance. You need to have what's called a T-shaped experience, right? So you need to have an
Right.
overview of the whole profession and then go deeply in something. And I mean, I'm definitely deeper on the writing side, which doesn't mean I can't open up my Illustrator and do something if I have to, but I'm not as good as someone who is really trained as a designer, of course.
Right. Okay. So, the in terms of experience, the technical jobs are, far easier to get across the world because, as you said, TCS. So most of them, send their software engineers or mechanical engineers
Yes.
outside. How much of the other aspects of jobs are getting, outsourced, at least for the European market?
It's hard to know. So again, I'm going to have to maybe step back and clarify something. Okay, so for example, and we're not talking about marketing, we're just talking about jobs in general.
Right.
Europe has 27 countries. Okay,
Yeah.
so I am a French citizen now. I became French in 2019, so I have the legal right to work in any of those countries. Okay, but the standard of
Okay.
living is not the same. The salaries are not the same. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
the salary that someone in Italy gets is probably, I want to say, 2/3 of what someone in France gets. Okay, and
Okay.
in Switzerland, it's probably double to triple what the person in France gets. The cost of living is higher as well. So what you see, so for example, when I was in Philip Morris, and again, I left in 2015, so it's been a while, but we were in Lausanne, which was about 3 hours from Italy. Okay, so we had a two-tier strategy, if you will, with Accenture, which was the partner at the time, where we were
Right.
near-shoring from Italy
Mm-hmm.
and outsourcing to India. So we had
Okay.
certain roles where the people could actually come 4 or 5 days a week to the office, and then we had
Mm-hmm.
other things where we were sort of outsourcing, right? So again, it depends on the country, but because of the way, and then what ends up happening is everyone puts their call center in, say, Prague. This happened about 15 years ago, and then the salaries go up. So then everyone moves it to Romania, and then the salaries go up.
Right.
So it's really a yeah, it just the answer is it depends, but you shouldn't think of Europe as completely homogenous, because it really isn't as a market. And the other thing is that the language issue really becomes problematic. I think now, I have a 15-year-old daughter. I think that generation speaks English much better because they have Netflix, they watch things in English, than say my husband's
Right.
generation. But if you put someone who speaks French with a person who speaks Slovenian, they don't understand each other. You have the same
Right.
thing in India, but I think in India you have more of that commonality of English, right? And of Hindi, at least in the
Yes.
north. And in Europe, it's not the same, and there are definitely jobs. I mean, there are definitely jobs I see all the time in Switzerland that require fluency in 3 languages.
Okay. So, Edna, if we were to, go back onto your experience
Yes.
and you were to give one tip to the freshers, what would be that for them to be able to be successful in their careers? One motto, one thing that you followed and you think is going to help them in their careers.
Keep learning all the time. Keep learning, keep learning, keep learning. And in
Okay.
terms of an activity, I, I
Hmm.
I I don't now, but you should be sending out your resume every
Hmm.
year and having at least 1 or 2 interviews to test the market. Because that way, even
Okay.
if you stay with a company for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, right? You know
Hmm.
if you're de-skilling or if the market is changing. So you need to make sure,
Okay.
because no one's going to take care of you from now until you're ready to retire. You're the only one who can take care of yourself, and you need to have your thumb on the pulse of the market, and that's only possible if you're out there on a regular basis.
Okay. That's actually a very good insight. We've not had that from any of our guests before, but I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. Thank you
And you
so
can
much.
see, you can do market research on LinkedIn. You can see
Mhm.
what are the skills, what are the tools I need to know, what are the what is becoming sexier, what is less, where are there more jobs, where are there less, and then you can adapt and pivot what you're doing while still staying in the same area, right? Because what you don't want to be
Mhm.
is stuck on a technology or in a field that's dying.
Yeah, it kind of will help you upgrade your skills also, as per the market trends. You might think you know, but it might require you to upgrade your skills. So, Edna, we've discussed about the technical skills required, the qualifications, and various other aspects. I just want to understand what kind of soft skills or cultural understanding is required for, people coming from India. And I'm sorry, I'm, again and again asking you about people coming in from India, but my audience is basically based out of
which
India.
is fine, and I think that basically, I mean, I'm not sure that your audience knows this, but I've spent about 5 months this year in India, so I'm very familiar with your audience. And I've done a project with a large Indian company, so I have some idea, although my sample size is smaller. I think, look, the whole concept of soft skills is extremely important, both in the US and in Europe, okay? There are different concepts in terms of hierarchy, in terms of managing people, in terms of work-life balance. I think one of the shocking things to an Indian coming to France is that we're legally not allowed to work more than 35 hours a week. Okay.
Wow.
So and this is even for professionals. So if you're at my level and you're expected to work more, you get extra compensation in terms of day off. So I get an extra 12 to 15 days a year holidays because I work more than 35 hours a week. So in some countries it's illegal to send emails after working hours. So it's really the concept of it's all at work is simply not there. Although again, there are varying differences from country to country. um yeah, so I think that's one thing that's hugely different. And I think another thing that I've seen, because I worked with a lot of people from IIMs and IITs in India, is that there's a lot of you're going to be asked to think and to think creatively and to think outside of the box. So it's not always just sort of, doing something in an exceptional way. It's really going further, and it's also being responsible for the output. It's not just I'm doing sort of the coding, I need to make sure the customer is happy. So but I think that comes, I think that if you're going to a country in Europe, and again, as I said, they differ dramatically from country to country, with an open mind, and you say, I'm not just going to be good technically at my job, but I'm really going to focus and see how other people behave and see what's expected of me, and not be afraid to ask, to ask my supervisor, to ask my peers, to ask my friends who were there longer. It will make you more successful.
Okay. Yeah, because somewhere I can understand this cultural, difference, because when you said you had a long talk with your supervisor at UNESCO asking
Yes.
whether you want to continue 10, 15 years in the same profile, I don't think in India any of the bosses are going to be asking that question. For them, it's like, I don't want to disrupt. I don't want to lose the resource, which is good and is, helping me as well. So yes, that huge cultural difference would be there.
But that was a good boss. They're bad bosses too. I mean, I think, but for me, a good manager, a good leader is someone who knows when it's time for the person to move on because it's better for him or for her, right? Or when it's time to stretch the person, or when it's time to tell the person maybe you need to do a lateral move. I think it's part of sort of the relationship. And again, I really think the world of work is changing dramatically. And I don't think we're going to be seeing the same kinds of careers and the same kind of working relationships as we have in the past anywhere in the world. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Edna, for joining us today and
It was a
sharing your experience and
pleasure.
insights.
It
Thank
was a pleasure. And anyone watching this, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I try to publish fairly frequently, and the two topics that I work on most often are either sustainability or communications marketing. So I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So that was Miss Edna Yahil sharing with us her journey, how she started, and how she has been constantly upgrading herself, and what she said about not stopping to learn. You need to constantly learn and upgrade your skills. And as she said, that if you want to keep understanding the pulse of the market and understanding that, whether your current capabilities and knowledge is up to date, you should always try and get one interview in a year. Even if you're not planning to leave the market, what you will understand is what is the pulse of the market, what is it that people are looking for in terms of employees. And as she said, that it is you who is supposed to be responsible for your growth, your job. Nobody else is going to take care of you. It is you and only you. I hope you had good insights from this interview. And if you have any questions from Edna about any of the aspects of the job markets in Europe, or the roles that are evolving, or any technical questions that you have, you can write to us in the comments below. But please remember, she's just a professional working in Paris and not a consultant when it comes to jobs. So think of your questions like that and then put them in the comments below. Also, do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.